The moment my daughter saw her new tutor, she dropped her backpack, ran across the living room, and threw her arms around the woman's waist as if she had been waiting years for that exact moment. The tutor froze. Her face went completely white. And when she slowly looked at me, I felt something inside my chest collapse, because I knew those eyes. I had spent 11 years trying to forget them. 11 years telling myself that the woman I had loved was gone forever. Yet there she stood in my home, holding my daughter like they had never been separated. I barely managed to whisper the words that escaped my lips, "It's really you. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel." Someone in our community may need to hear a story today that reminds them some goodbyes are not always the end. My name is Callum Hayes, and for most of my adult life, I believed I had learned how to live with unanswered questions. I was 41, a single father, and the owner of a small architectural drafting business in a quiet town where everybody seemed to know everybody else's business. My daughter, Maisie, was 12 and had inherited her mother's stubbornness, curiosity, and remarkable ability to notice things adults tried to hide. She was bright, sensitive, and fiercely protective of the people she loved. She had also struggled with mathematics for almost a year, and after several difficult months at school, her teacher recommended that we find her a private tutor. That was how Eleanor Hart walked into our lives. The name meant nothing to me when I first read it in the email from the tutoring service. Eleanor was described as an experienced mathematics instructor with a degree in education and several years of tutoring experience. Her rates were reasonable, her references were excellent, and she was available on weekday afternoons. I agreed to the first session without giving it much thought. I should have paid closer attention to the photograph attached to her profile. Maybe I would have recognized her sooner. But the photograph was small, slightly blurry, and taken from an angle. 11 years can change a person's face. Grief can change it even more. I was in my home office that afternoon when I heard the front door open. Maisie had been waiting eagerly for her new tutor. She had spent the entire lunch hour arranging her notebooks and sharpening pencils as if she were preparing for an examination. Then came the sound of her backpack hitting the floor. I stepped into the hallway. Maisie was already running. She ran past me so quickly that I barely had time to react before she reached Eleanor. And then she hugged her. Not the polite hug of a child meeting an adult. It was the kind of hug that came from somewhere deep inside her. Eleanor's arms remained frozen at her sides for several seconds. Then, slowly, she wrapped them around Maisie. Her eyes lifted over my daughter's shoulder. They met mine. And everything inside me stopped. I knew those eyes. I knew the tiny crease that appeared beside her left eyebrow when she was trying not to cry. I knew the way she tilted her head when she was frightened. I knew the small scar near her chin from the bicycle accident we had when we were 28. I knew her. Eleanor was actually Elise. Elise Morgan. My former wife. The woman who had disappeared from our lives 11 years earlier. The woman I had once believed had abandoned me and our unborn child. The woman I had mourned without ever having the courage to bury the memories. Maisie finally released her. She looked up at Eleanor with a happiness I had never seen before and told her that she had missed her. My blood ran cold. Eleanor looked at me. She seemed terrified. I couldn't speak. For 11 years, I had carried one explanation for her disappearance. She had left because she didn't want to become a mother. She had left because she didn't love me anymore. She had left because she wanted another life. That was the story I had told myself. That was the story everyone had told me. But my daughter had just called her by a name I had never heard from her before. She had called her Ellie. A nickname only 3 people had ever used. Elise. Maisie. And me. I asked my daughter how she knew her. Maisie looked confused and said she had met Eleanor at the tutoring center the previous week when the school arranged an introductory assessment. She said Eleanor had recognized her immediately. Then she said something that made my knees weak. She told me Eleanor had cried when she saw her. I looked at Elise. She lowered her eyes. For a few moments, nobody moved. Then she quietly admitted the truth. She had known exactly who Maisie was. She had known the moment she walked into the assessment room. And she had recognized me from a photograph on Maisie's school emergency contact form. She had been terrified to approach me. She said she had spent 11 years trying to find a way back. I didn't know whether to believe her. My anger returned before my heart could stop it. I remembered the hospital room where I had held newborn Maisie alone. I remembered waiting for Elise to come back. I remembered calling her phone until the number was disconnected. I remembered asking her parents where she was and receiving nothing but silence. For years, I believed she had chosen to abandon us. Now she was standing in front of me, telling me there had been another story. The truth was far more painful. Elise had not left willingly. 11 years earlier, during the final months of her pregnancy, Elise's older brother, Vincent, had been involved in serious financial trouble. He owed money to dangerous people after a failed business deal, and when creditors began threatening the family, he convinced Elise that staying with me would put me and our unborn daughter in danger. Elise refused to believe him at first. Then one afternoon, she received photographs of me leaving my office. Another showed our apartment. Another showed Elise walking to her prenatal appointment. Someone had been watching us. Vincent told her that if she didn't disappear, the people after him would come after me. Elise panicked. She was 29, pregnant, frightened, and convinced that sacrificing herself was the only way to protect us. But there was another piece of the story she had never told anyone. On the day she disappeared, she had been driving toward my office to tell me everything. Her car was struck by another vehicle on the highway. She survived. But she suffered a severe head injury. When she woke in the hospital, she couldn't remember her own name. She spent months recovering. By the time pieces of her memory returned, Vincent had disappeared. She tried to find me. But by then I had moved. I had changed my phone number. And because she had been declared missing under complicated circumstances, she struggled to obtain the records she needed. For years, she searched. She said she visited towns where she believed we might have lived. She contacted old friends. She wrote letters to addresses that were no longer valid. She eventually discovered that I had become a father. But she couldn't find the courage to approach me. She feared that I hated her. I wanted to hate her. It would have been easier. But then Maisie came into the room holding an old photograph. It was one of the few pictures I had of Elise. Maisie had found it years earlier in a box in my closet. She looked at the photograph, then at Eleanor, and said she knew because her mother had the same smile. My daughter had apparently recognized her before I did. That broke something inside me. I sat down. Elise began crying. She said she had never stopped loving us. She had missed birthdays she could never celebrate. She had imagined Maisie's first day of school. She had wondered whether she would love books, whether she would hate vegetables, whether she would inherit her father's terrible sense of direction. She had imagined everything. But she had never believed she deserved to walk back into our lives. I asked her why she had become a tutor. She said because teaching children had become the closest thing she had to being a mother. She had helped hundreds of children with their fears, their mistakes, and their confidence. But every time a little girl called her by a nickname, some part of her wondered what Maisie would have been like. Maisie had been listening quietly. Then she walked over and took Elise's hand. She didn't ask why her mother had left. She didn't ask who was responsible. She simply asked whether Elise wanted to stay. Elise looked at me. I didn't know what to say. So I told her that staying would not erase 11 years. It wouldn't undo the pain. It wouldn't magically turn us back into the people we had been. If she wanted to become part of Maisie's life, she would have to earn that place slowly. Elise nodded. She said she understood. And she did. The first few months were difficult. Maisie wanted everything immediately. She wanted her mother at school events. She wanted photographs. She wanted stories. She wanted to know why other children had mothers who had been there from the beginning while hers had appeared when she was 12. Sometimes she became angry. Sometimes she blamed me. Sometimes she blamed Elise. Sometimes she blamed herself. Elise never defended herself with excuses. She answered every question she could. When she didn't know something, she admitted it. When Maisie was angry, she listened. And when Maisie asked why she had never come sooner, Elise finally gave the simplest answer. She had been afraid. Not of Maisie. Of failing her again. That honesty slowly changed everything. One afternoon, several months later, Maisie struggled with a mathematics assignment. She became frustrated and pushed her notebook away. Elise sat beside her. Instead of giving her the answer, she helped her work through the problem step by step. I watched from the kitchen. The scene was painfully ordinary. And yet it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My daughter was learning mathematics from her mother. Something I had once believed would never happen. When Maisie finally solved the problem, she smiled. Then she hugged Elise. This time, Elise cried openly. I turned away because I couldn't bear to let them see me crying too. Eventually, I learned another truth. Vincent had passed away several years earlier. Before his death, he had written Elise a letter confessing that he had exaggerated the danger surrounding our family. He had been terrified of losing his sister and had manipulated her through fear. He had never intended to destroy our family. But he had. And that realization gave Elise something she had been missing for years. Permission to stop blaming herself for every consequence of someone else's choices. She didn't forgive Vincent immediately. But she eventually stopped allowing his actions to control her future. I understood that feeling. For 11 years, I had allowed an unanswered question to control mine. I had built walls around my heart because I thought protecting myself from another loss was the same thing as healing. It wasn't. Healing meant allowing the truth to hurt. Then allowing it to change you. 1 year after Eleanor first entered our home, Maisie had her school award ceremony. The event took place in the afternoon. Parents filled the auditorium. Students sat proudly in their rows. Maisie received an award for academic improvement. When she walked onto the stage, she looked toward the audience. I was sitting beside Elise. Maisie smiled at both of us. And when she returned to her seat, she quietly slipped her hand into each of ours. 3 hands. 1 family. Not the family we had planned. Not the family that existed 11 years ago. But a family built from truth, patience, forgiveness, and second chances. After the ceremony, we walked outside into the bright afternoon sunlight. Maisie ran ahead. Elise and I followed. She looked at me and apologized again for everything. This time, I stopped her. I told her that forgiveness wasn't pretending those 11 years hadn't happened. It meant choosing not to let those years decide what the next 11 would look like. She cried. I held her. And for the first time since she disappeared, holding her didn't feel like holding on to the past. It felt like welcoming the future. Before we end, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved disappeared because fear controlled their choices, and years later they returned asking for forgiveness, would you give them a second chance? Could you separate the pain they caused from the person they became? Leave a meaningful comment and tell our community what you believe true forgiveness really means. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes the people we lose aren't truly gone. Sometimes they are lost themselves. Sometimes life takes them down roads we don't understand. And sometimes, after years of silence, they find their way home. That afternoon, as my daughter walked between us holding both our hands, I finally understood something I had spent 11 years refusing to believe. Love doesn't always return the way it left. Sometimes it comes back older. Wiser. Wounded. Afraid. But still capable of becoming something beautiful. And when Maisie looked up at us and smiled, I realized that I hadn't lost 11 years of my daughter's life. I had been given the chance to make sure I didn't lose the rest of it. And beside me walked the woman I once thought I would never see again. Not the same woman who had left. Not the woman I had spent years mourning. But Elise. Her mother. My former wife. And, perhaps, someday, my best friend again. For the first time in 11 years, I didn't whisper her name with grief. I whispered it with gratitude. Because she was really there. And this time, nobody was leaving.